So we will speak about a special approach of design, an approach who don't focus on the local, but more on the global civic initiative. And in Melbourne, we have a study, a research center who take this as goal, and we will listen Chris Beat and David Russell and Bonnie Lester and Julian Lee, who teach in this institute of Global Civic Initiative. Can we start with Chris Beat?
No, so you're starting with me today. Hi, I'm Julian.
Okay. Hi, Julian. Hi.
Yes,
nice to see you. Nice
Likewise.
to see you. Yeah. Please explain us a little bit about your fascinating planetarian initiative.
Oh, yes. So thank you so much for having us today. So Chris Beat is in between two meetings, so he'll be joining us in the middle. And I'll be, I guess, talking a little bit about what I'll be saying in a few minutes. But with respect to the Planetary Civics Initiative, I guess there's a couple of things that, in relation to it. One is, I guess, the fundamental, recognition of the global and planetary circumstances that I guess we find ourselves in, and trying to seek ways in which we can, I guess, as a university, both break out of our silos and become, to some extent, solutions orientated towards addressing in concrete ways, I guess, the issues that confront us at the minute, and trying to adopt not only, I guess, a global perspective, but also a planetary one, which is what Chris Speed will be presenting on in a little while. And so the Planetary Civics Initiative is there are others in my university who could speak, I guess, more precisely about it, but it emerged as a collaborative, I guess, endeavor, but has had other parties from around the world join as, I guess, stakeholders in it. But it began with RMIT and a relationship with Dark Matter Labs, and with a view to, I guess, trying to think in what might be thought of as a planetary way, or as a planetary, with the planet as a concept. And the planet as a concept, as opposed to, for example, the global or globalization. And so what I'm going to be presenting on or speaking on for a few moments' time until Chris comes on deck is, I guess, one element of the, I guess, the philosophy underneath that. And so the Planetary Civics Initiative has, I guess, a close cousin of what is the Regenerative Futures Initiative. And the Regenerative Futures Initiative, at least the current moment, it is a strongly, I guess, a teaching-orientated endeavor. And that's kind of where that's where I'm coming in, and that's where Chris will be speaking. I'm not sure whether Bonnie's circumstance is going to allow her to chime in today, but that's what David will also be speaking to somewhat today. So maybe what I'll do, if I may, is share my screen for a little bit and go through my presentation. And at that point,
thank you very much. Yeah.
Application. All right, I think this is it. All right, hopefully I'm on it. All right. Okay. My friends online, you can see my PowerPoint presentation?
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
I won't go into share the presentation mode, because then sometimes it does funny things to my screen. So, yeah. So this, what I'm about to speak on today relates specifically to a chapter that I published with some co-authors earlier on in the year. And I don't really like the title of it, but it's called Teaching for Buoyancy in the Precarious Present for an Inevitable Future. And so if we can just ignore the title of this chapter, which is unforgivably jargonistic, what this is about how do we teach in a university in a way that promotes grounded optimism and avoids defeatedness, so that we and our students can believe in and contribute to a future that is different from the seemingly foregone conclusion of an irredeemably degraded world of tomorrow. And I think some of these sentiments about, I guess, fears about what the world of tomorrow is going to be like, even stronger in the last weeks. And I guess the challenge for those teaching within universities is in relation to how do you acknowledge those sentiments while at the same time enabling students to feel, if you allow the words, as having some agency and empowerment to make change. So it might be useful for me to say a couple of words around, I guess, my initial background. So my initial research was with social activists in Kuala Lumpur, and even though my current work, which is on issues of learning and teaching and classroom, scholarship, seemed very different to me for a while from my initial research with social activists in Kuala Lumpur. What I've recently begun to realize is that under the circumstances that, when I was hanging out with these social activists, the opportunity for making change, or they had immense hurdles to bring about the kinds of changes that they want. And in some ways, that is a very similar situation to what we find ourselves in today. We have, I guess, the future that many of us wish to move towards, but then there are just huge, complex hurdles to overcome. And so how do people in such circumstances actually, undertake activity to bring about change? And fundamental to that is what I guess I would call grounded optimism that I'll come to in a minute. But I think one thing that is worth me noting, because at least in more recent times, I can be, at least amongst the colleagues who know me, sort of regarded as the quote-unquote optimist. But I don't think I am sort of by nature like a quote-unquote optimist. And in fact, here are some of my publications from, a number of years ago, one of which is called Every Silver Lining Has a Cloud, and another one is called Hooray for Pessimism, which was me reflecting on Arthur Schopenhauer. So it's not that like I am by disposition an optimist, but this is, I guess, where I've come to a form of, if you like, optimism as a result of, I guess, my experience in the past, and also, I guess, the teaching mission which we have today. So in that journey, there was one key moment where in my first year class, we were trying, this is around 2016, trying to look at the phenomenon of global warming and why it seemed to be the case that, so little traction had been gained on it. And I had set this reading, which is from a sort of a slightly, it's a well-informed Australian magazine, Society, Politics and Culture, that really tried to look at the phenomenon of, I guess, our response to global warming and why it was that it was so hard to get this traction. And I thought it was fantastic because I thought it took global warming and, I guess, humanity's response to it, which can be a large amorphous thing, and broke it down into, historical factors, psychological factors, political circumstances, and so on. And I thought, oh, this is great. It really sort of breaks it apart and makes things easier to understand. However, one of the things I did not anticipate, but just was so clear in the classroom, was that it was so complicated that the students just felt overwhelmed by the hugeness of it. And then at that point, I kind of realized that I didn't feel as if I had done my students a service. I don't feel as if they left the room feeling like, oh, I feel confident in myself. I feel confident that I can bring about change. So that is the turning point, at least for me. And this does connect in with what we're talking about today, which is about, how do we bring about change in a thoughtful and positive and constructive manner. And therefore, I guess one of the notions that I try to talk about now is this notion of grounded optimism. Other people have referred to this as intelligent optimism, but grounded optimism is not at all to deny the worrying and heartbreaking news and events around the world. And it doesn't say that things are going to be fine and that, we don't have to worry. What grounded optimism is the view that bad news is not the only news, however. And even though it might seem that way, grounded optimism acknowledges that there are achievements and gains that we should take heart in. And it is grounded because it is founded in many real-world examples of well-thought-out collective effort that have resulted in genuine movement in what, if you like, we might experience as being the right direction. And these are very easy to overlook, and they're often not very, in terms of like news articles, often not very interesting either. And the other thing which I just want to reflect on as well is in relation to, I guess, our experience of being in a university. And one of the things that we are one of the things that I guess is an experience for many of those of us in university is that we're very good at doing the critique, like, this is problematic and this is problematic, but there's often like a fear of actually saying something actively positive. And I remember this one experience of, academic colleague saying, this is why all this, your policy propositions are all, problematic. But then when asked, then what would you propose? And then the academic was like, oh, no, it's not my place to actually propose, what we should do. And so therefore, if everything is problematic, we can easily become paralyzed. And so perhaps the key thing I'm kind of, emphasizing today is that students shouldn't just learn about things. They need to learn about what they can do to contribute, I guess, in a way that makes positive change. And so as I kind of round out, I guess, what I'm about to say, and I think, Bonnie, if I'm correct, you might be able to chime in to kind of say a few words with respect to what I'm saying, if I understand correctly. So just on my last two slides, I'll just note that, for example, this is a course I have been teaching called Global Processes, and it was the course that I referred to before, where I kind of overwhelmed students about, climate change. And what I can say is that the way the course is taught now, students kind of come away from the course feeling optimistic and saying, oh, I really feel like, I matter in the world and I can make a difference and so on. And I know like what I can do. So just for those who might be interested, it's broken up into 3 cycles. The first cycle is about, larger conceptual ideas around global and globalization. But then this cycle 2 is the one I would sort of pay emphasis on, which are really about things that you, the student, or anyone can do at any given moment to either be mapping out what the situation is and charting kind of ways forward. So whether it's how to collaborate, when you're undertaking, a project or an intervention, what are some design principles to weave in that allow you to kind of fail confidently? And for example, a case study on the Antarctic Treaty, which was successful, and processes that are associated with futurist thinking, which is future casting. And then here, just to round it off, a couple of weeks about what students can concretely do as students, at the present moment, not just casting forward, a number of years into the future when they're professionals. So in case anyone's interested in like what my reading list might be to support, I guess, attitudes of this sort, before I hand over to Bonnie in about 30 seconds, here are just a few of them. One of them, some of these will be familiar to you. So Rutger Bregman from the Netherlands, of course, very well known for his work on this. But there's also Sarah Ichioka and Michael Paul Lynn's book, Flourish, which also talks a lot about regenerative design. But there's a Melbourne outfit called, it used to be called Future Crunch, but it's now called Fix the News. And they put out a newsletter every month or so that kind of collates all the, I guess, whatever the opposite of disheartening is, heartening news from around the world that kind of enables us and it would enable students to realize, oh, it's not just bad news all the time. There are these things happening. And importantly, they happen and are achieved as a result of collaborative and sustained and thoughtful collaborative effort. So that's where I'll end my bit of my presentation. But I don't know if either of you have questions, or Bonnie, did you want to chime in with respect to, I guess, some of the work that you do?
Thanks a lot, and I propose we directly go to the next, and we make a discussion at the end. Is this okay?
So I think because Chris Speed is going to join us about 1:30, so So I think what we will do is, I think Bonnie was just going to reflect on a few minutes about what I was saying, and like in connection with what she, I guess, some of what she's doing.
Yeah. Perfect.
Merci.
Okay. Hi.
Hi, Bonnie.
Yeah, nice to meet you. I'm Bonnie Lester. I am part of the Planetary Pedagogies group, and I'm also teaching a couple of design studios in landscape architecture at RMIT. So I'll kind of like give a brief sort of reflection on some of the questions and provocations to come out of those studios. Briefly to introduce myself, I guess. My research and teaching focuses on the kind of philosophical and design implications of technologies and interdisciplinary practices. And I have a special interest in how to respond to the planetary condition in design. In particular, how this sort of influences philosophically and aesthetically. So basically, the studios that I've run at RMIT this year have revolved around both testing and exploring how designers can identify and respond to planetary landscape conditions across multiple scales. So in running these studios, I've also come across some challenges in sort of expectations for particular kinds of design outcomes that don't always necessarily leave room for the scope and scale of these challenging conditions. So to kind of briefly summarize these, the sort of most of these, what I would call planetary conditions, largely revolve around rapid technological change and innovation, which has led to both the possibility of planetary scale observation and also the emergence of new ground conditions. The landscapes of cities across the world are affected by these non-local planetary conditions as climate change alters seasons and ecosystems, as animals migrate, as climate refugees arrive, as pollution accumulates, and global politics influences policy, as well as the more technical side where the internet sort of connects across the globe and disseminates knowledge and delivers culture, and as AIs that are built in sort of foreign countries impose new modes of thinking and imagining. So the scope is very broad and vast. But in the context of landscape architecture, these things challenge and exceed the traditional practice and the traditional notions, in particular of what we think of as a site, and where that sort of site of intervention begins and ends. So the students in the studio have been are free to respond to any of these conditions, from biodiversity, migration, climate, these infrastructures. And throughout the projects, there have kind of been some key questions raised as to what it is to design with the planetary and what a landscape architect's role is in that. So I'll just really briefly kind of pose a few of those provocations now. So for instance, one question that comes out of it is, whose responsibility is it in the planetary scale to ensure that important ecological zones are not heavily disrupted by global human activities? Another one is, how can we map and represent landscapes and ecologies and innovate in that space? Because while cartographic practices are pretty well established and very precise and very useful in generating spatial knowledge, the way we map the world is also it also imposes limitations and biases, and bring this into our design workflow that then flows into the things that we build in the world. So I'm also really excited by projects that try to explore alternative methods of mapping and rendering the planet, and perhaps even how representations of landscapes can serve an emotional purpose in helping cope with a changing world. Another sort of project type of response that's come out of the studios has kind of brought attention to the role of landscape architects in not just being responsible for material elements of sites, but also responsible for the design and development of programs and tools, which can enable industry and larger disciplines to better accommodate the complexities of ecosystems. And another thought is how landscape architecture and urban design can also play a role in anticipating the flow-on effects of these large-scale conditions and their possible cultural ramifications, especially as we have climate refugees, and we have large sort of cities that provide a platform for all of these different cultures to manifest in different ways, and how we can attend to that sort of cultural contingency as well of planetary large-scale conditions. So overall, the students, the studio has been about discovering this diverse and highly specific sort of range of situations in which these conditions can be encountered, and then sort of testing and exploring how designers can identify and respond to those conditions across multiple scales. So yeah, thank you for listening to my reflections on this experience that I've had over the last year. And if you would like to talk in any more detail about any of the projects in the studio, feel free to reach out.
I think this is absolutely in echo with elements we work in Paris in the moment. We have our last book is Come to be Planetary Jardiners, Planetary Gardeners. So it's from Gilles Clément and Coloco, and this is absolutely in your topic, I think. So I think we have any things to exchange about your program.
Yeah, I would love that. Sounds great.
And
come to be in English in January by Lars Müller.
Yeah. So, but for me, the question maybe I can here ask. The question is, we use a lot of times the word planetarian. What does this mean for you in a concrete way? So how we had a panel on relation between the local and the global, or the planetarian, and we try to a little bit look behind these concepts. How you are approaching and see this term planetarian, maybe to both of you.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think the vector between the local and the global is kind of the vector of the trajectory of modernism that we're on. And in order to kind of escape that, I think we do need alternative concepts. And the planetary, while it's not very clearly defined yet, I think there's a lot of different manifestations that it takes as a concept. I think it's very much needed in order to escape that vector of kind of either we are responding locally or we are going and responding globally. But there are ways that these conditions manifest that aren't either of those. Like they're very large, like the migration of whales, for example. It's not the entire globe, it's quite specific, but it's also not local. So there's this like medium ground that needs articulation. And I think the planetary is what attempts to start to articulate that.
So it's not only a question of scale, of square.
Of scale, yeah.
Scale, yeah,
sure.
It's not scale. It's also, yeah, there's more to space and the articulation of these conditions as they manifest than just small to big. There's also the way that they kind of relate. I don't know, it's difficult.
We've also been looking at time and temporality rather than spatial, particularly geometric metaphors that tend to want to encompass or universalize a notion of the global and its connection, say, from point A to point B as a network type of line that can encompass the globe. Thinking with time and temporality and kind of durations, deep time as well as kind of micro perceptions of time, as well as non-human perceptions of time. I think resisting the tendency to spatialize time, I think, is a key strategy for thinking with the planetary as well.
Anyway, often we have Edgar Morin as a reference in this logic of looking in a systemic but way to the world, but to confront to complexity, not to avoid complexity, but to make complexity settings. So seeing everything in interrelation, I guess this goes in your direction. Is Edgar Morin a reference for you? Or you don't know him? It's maybe a French.
Put in the chat. We do. I am for a long time reading work like Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari as a primary influence, and work that has kind of emerged. Rosi Bradatti's work, for instance, the feminist materialisms are very helpful.
No, it's interesting what kind of concepts of the planetarian are circulating also in different language spaces. And are these texts translated or not? And this is just interesting. What are our shared references?
I had another reference, is China's calendar of 60 years, who changed the perception of the planetary. When you say we don't make only one cycle, but 60 cycles. And what is, for me, absolutely fascinating of landscape design is really this capacity of the not human life to be longer as the human life. And this gives a perspective of time and perspective of evolution, who is absolutely different as our evolution. And this change our perceptions also. But yeah. And
what kind of role can play design in that? And then we take back again by representing these different time and space conceptions.
But we let you speak now.
Well, I think, Julian, you wanted to jump in on that sort of definitions of the planetary as well.
Oh, no. I mean, the only thing which I'll add to what's already been said is that I think one of the useful things that might be about, I guess, the word or the concept of the planetary is that it does, like, words are situated in webs of meaning. And then a globalization or the global is like so woven into an already existing set of meanings that, one of the things that the planetary makes possible is, I guess, the creation of a new set of web of meanings that would be difficult to do with a concept like the global. But the planetary also does, I think, lend itself to things with respect to, seeing within the moment the huge planetary, I guess, time scales that are at play and the impacts of things that happened maybe millions of years ago with respect to how they then get manifest within, the environment and the atmosphere, even in times today, and how our impacts today will have traces long into the future as well. So the planetary does kind of help to crystallize some of those sentiments. But yeah, that was all I had to say. David, I think. Oh, sorry.
As well, just in the thought you had around kind of non-human timescales and things like that, I think the planetary offers up not just like a way to think of the human in relation to like the rest of the planet, but also how to redefine the human itself as a planetary thing. Because typically we think of culture as being locally embedded, and we think of the planet as a geological thing. But it also opens up the possibility for us to rethink humans or the human as a planetary acting sort of agent, and also how even things like the microbiome that constitute the literal physical human is something that is influenced by planetary systems of agricultural practices and infectious disease and so on. So it just allows us to think beyond either culture as globalization or culture as local, and think about how even our bodies and our minds are in sort of conversation with these larger influences. And it just, opens up the space for that to be articulated.
Thanks a lot. Perhaps we let
John, now
so I think we might be handing over to David.
Yeah.
Oh, but has he?
This was David before.
Yeah.
Okay.
So he's so David was here, but I don't know what has become of him.
Okay.
So we'll just give him a second to rejoin.
Sure. And if not, we can ask another question, because I'm
yes. All right, let's do that.
Yeah, I'm since you speak about, for me, the word is not optimism but empowerment, but maybe, yeah, this is a question. I think we had today a discussion referring to the concept of Edouard Glissant about the tout monde, and which is also a concept to face and critique. So not to overcome what is a disaster, but by not thematizing it, but by confronting and searching for solutions, coming to a complex optimism. So it's, and that's my question, the empowering is to give the capacity to confront and to overcome the problems, and I think not to just not to thematize them, I guess. But this is,
yeah. So I think where I would go, I guess, with the conversation around optimism is like, I think many of us will have encountered situations or been in scenarios where the situation at hand is not one where, by doing what we might think is, the right thing or the thing that needs to be done, the likelihood of success can sometimes seem very low. But you still know what it is that you think you should be doing in order to, I guess, achieve that objective. And you attempt it irrespective of almost like the likelihood of success, because it's the right thing to do or it's the right direction to go. And I think what's important is that irrespective of how we might feel about the chance of us succeeding, we still nevertheless have our toolkit about what we can try to do, and we go and move ahead anyway, because the thing is sometimes you do succeed in those activities where you thought maybe you wouldn't. And I think what is clear or key to me is that, by drawing on, for me at least, sort of a phenomenological perspective of, how do we experience the world, not in abstract terms, but in any given situation. I guess the world presents us with scenarios where there are different opportunities for action to take place. And so if we can enable students to sort of both inhabit, I guess, the realm of the theoretical and the conceptual, but also give them, I guess, notions about things that they can concretely do and choose from within specific moments, then that enables them, I guess, not only to be kind of wedded to optimism or hope, but also it just gives them like a practical sense of what they can do in any given scenario. And so I think that's, so on the one hand, I talk about it as grounded optimism, because even against the odds and also on the basis of, like, the various, positive, I guess, progress that has been made on one thing or another, by recognizing that success can happen through this collaborative and thoughtful effort, it does enable us to kind of realize, we do have options in any given moment.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks. Perhaps
David is back with us.
Yeah, we let David now present his speech.
Sure. And sorry, I dropped out mysteriously there, but I'm back, and hopefully the connection's okay now. Yeah, I think I'll just pick up on what Julian and Bonnie have shared, and kind of talk a little bit, just very briefly, about maybe the 10 years or so of work that I've been doing on I guess what I would call practices of collective reimagining in response to planetary changes, particularly around climate change, biodiversity loss, and the impacts of digital technologies at kind of a ubiquitous scale. But also over the past 5 or 6 years, the situated urgencies of decolonization as kind of something that is inseparable from those other planetary changes and the types of responses that might become both necessary and possible. And I guess the notion of collective reimagining is one that I guess I think about in terms of a kind of activist philosophy. So it is putting philosophy into action collectively. So thinking in action at scale. So I guess developing methodologies that could in fact involve hundreds, if not thousands of people thinking, working together to reimagine, particularly, I guess, focusing on educational cultures and environments. So my PhD was actually on reimagining the university in response to climate change and other planetary scale impacts. And this involved working with hundreds of people across the university around, what do these impacts mean for them? How does it shift how scientists think about doing science, how artists think about doing art, designers, media studies, kind of every field is unsettled by these planetary impacts. They are a shock to thought. They force us to think differently about how we think and what we do. How could that sort of collectively lead to a reimagining of the university itself, both in terms of its physical learning environments, its infrastructures, but also in terms of the pedagogies and the practices, the ways of being. Particularly, one of the, I guess, kind of answers to that collective reimagining was the kind of recognition of the more than human or the non-human as a collaborator in how we might do that practice of reimagining. I've also worked with the question of how we reimagine primary and secondary schooling in response to climate change, working with children and young people of a range of different ages as not necessarily subjects of research or even participants, but actually as co-researchers, as thinkers, philosophers, artists, creators in their own right, and developing new methodologies to be able to work collaboratively in ways that bring child and youth voices on the planetary up to the level of curriculum development, policy development, rethinking how schools operate, rethinking how climate is integrated across all aspects of the curriculum, not just a little part of the science curriculum, but responding to the planetary in English and art, in mathematics, and kind of the whole, again, it is a kind of collective reimagining of the whole undertaking of educational experience and practice and systematization. From there, I kind of have gone in since developing sort of more international platforms for reimagining the city. So this has been since around 2017, and I'll share a website which kind of documents some of the projects that have been seeded over the last, I might have to reload. Oh yeah, so I'll just quickly share screen to show a couple of examples.
Perhaps I use this time to ask you one question.
Oh, sure.
About this contradiction or this difficulty to bring together the urgency of transformation we have to do, and this kind of impeachment or negative element we see that will not be possible in so short time. How you deal with this element on the planetary element and planetary thinking?
That's a great question. I mean, some of what I described before about trying to develop participatory methodologies at scale is one of the ways that I've been dealing with that urgency. Because I guess, what we are doing, and as I'll kind of talk through in this platform, we are building projects from the ground up around urgencies that local communities have in the places that they're living, in their cities in this instance. And I guess by developing methodologies that can scale up and build kind of knowledge sharing platforms across those situated projects, we begin to kind of see ways of responding urgently that don't rely on a top-down decision-making hierarchy or the kind of re-implementation of a grid over, the urgency. Because sometimes, particularly around much of the disaster and crisis thinking, it can be used to just push forward a technocratic approach that already makes the decisions without any consultation, any participation. And so I guess what we're trying to do is meet the urgency from the ground or the bottom up, if you know what I mean, with communities in local places, and then kind of put those into relationship at a more transnational and transcultural scale. So I think this platform, the Local Alternatives platform, is a good example of that. So we've worked in 7 or 8 cities since 2017 and seeded over 15 projects. Not all of them are on this website yet. But you can see that there are examples here where research questions are co-created with groups of children and young people working alongside researchers, architects, artists, policymakers, urban citizens from many different walks of life about what really matters to them in a place where they're impacted by planetary conditions. And then we develop projects and specific methods that enable children and young people's kind of imaginings of the histories and futures of their cities to be kind of put into practice, put into public circulation, public spaces. So this has led to the co-creation of exhibitions with children and young people in major public museums and galleries, different interventions in public spaces in cities around the world, really kind of, rethinking everything from kind of the intersection of kind of natural and cultural inheritance, or kind of the idea of natural cultural inheritance of climate change and what it feels like to inherit a world that is kind of coming apart, and kind of working, for instance, with a major public museum where children actually took over that museum and created a range of different interventions that allowed the public to think about these impacts, think about colonization and its impact on climate change and issues of climate justice, for example. Some of these very early ones were actually looking at kind of planetary visualizations and how this was kind of shifting the image of the planetary in children's imaginaries, and then how that might be articulated in terms of different educational impacts. So this is kind of an ongoing, it's a platform in the sense that it continues to seed new projects in different cities, depending on where the urgencies are, and how the collectives kind of form kind of organically around those urgencies to take forward. And then I'll quickly, I'll have to reload this one actually. This is a more recent platform that is only just launched in October. And this is specifically focusing on forests in a kind of expanded sense that is bringing transnational collectives together to explore relational ways of regenerating and revaluing forests through many different disciplinary perspectives, and actually starting to explore this collective aim of creating a new field of study called critical forest studies that sort of doesn't exist yet, but is being sort of brought together. So this is what we call a digital planting. So these are projects from all over the world. We have around 50 projects, and actually had a futures forum just this morning before I came here, where we had about 15 people from around the world share their projects on forests. And kind of central to this platform is the acknowledgement of indigenous sovereignty, knowledges, and communities as custodians of forests all over the world, and of very long and deep histories of recognizing the sentience of forests. So we're looking at the kinds of sensory and multiple intelligences of forests, and how that, whether through very tactile ways, as well as digital and arts-based practices of different kinds, can be a way to kind of shift into a different relationship with forests in everyday life, but also in terms of how we think with forests, how we study with forests. The kind of science coming out around forest intelligence, for instance, is transforming public understandings and perceptions of nature, of the non-human world, of the planetary. But of course, that understanding of forests as intelligent, as places of multiple intelligence and sentience, goes back thousands and thousands of years in indigenous knowledges. So we're quite interested in, what it would mean to kind of bring these different knowledges together in a way that would share them. So ranging from, very, scientific, sciences, chemistry, through to kind of, radical design-based, architectural and arts-based explorations and prototypes, as well as, very interesting kind of cutting-edge pedagogy and educational practice. For instance, this group in Finland exploring the microbiome of children in relation to the forests that they live near in Finland, and how the kind of microbiology of children is enhanced because of their interactions with that forest and shared at a kind of micro-perceptual level. So yeah, these are some of the examples, and we're adding to them all the time.
I think it's very interesting because in both example you give us, we see the approach is not one. The approach is how can we enrich to bring this different point of view, the different cultures, the different perspectives together, and let this complexity.
Exactly. And that's how we're approaching the practice of assembling the collectives, right? The collective reimagining is, we call it in this project, wild seeding. We are thinking with the ecologies of the forest and how we gather, how we exchange, how we disperse our different perspectives, different practices.
Go over this one solution and this approach to say this is what design cultivate often.
Yeah, it's a very systemic approach, which is turning around the hierarchy of human nature and so on. And what we had in these 24 hours as a topic, this term of globalization, which is very much connected to economic paradigm, and the planetarian as a form, more as a systemic approach, which is playing on this complex interrelational existence. And I think this what you showed us is very much illustrating. I'm just because we had some intervention, we will still have one on the mangroves, and I have seen the mangrove with its and from philosophers who use them or who have analyzed and confronted or even bound their, like Edouard Clisson,
Oh yes,
the theory on the mangrove logic, but
sure, yes, mangrove thinking, yes.
And I think that this is a very the rhizomatic, but also this kind of regenerative power. So to transform, to clean, it's an ecosystem which has the capacity to repair. And I think this is a very interesting also planetarian approach, and changes the relation and the role of the Anthropocene, the human being in the system, to a kind of more related than dominating approach, if I understood right.
Absolutely. Thank you for the reference to Lasson, because his work is central to everything I'm doing now.
Really?
And the work on the planetary pedagogies that we're developing.
Okay.
So
I recommend to hear maybe a little bit. Some hours earlier, we had his wife who wrote an article, and another colleague of Eduard who spoke about his approaches in perceiving. So that's exactly the 24 hours are about this idea to how to interconnect, because in the section this morning, I think at 7, we will have, now it's about open science, where the mangrove again is used in a Japanese research approach. Again, another form of analyzing the mangroves from the Asian logic, also from the ecological part, but then coming to see this as a concept of living together and this reparatory, regenerative approach. And this is a young colleague who's speaking about open science. So to share this knowledge, So interesting that this is a kind of the mangrove is doing its work, even in a human relation
just above
system.
The saltwater line.
Thank you so much to all of you about this very optimistic, positive, but also complex and also critical, mass confronting, but in a way of empowering and rethink the interrelational approach. And we are happy to share this. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks for hosting us so late, too.
And say hi to Tim.
Oh, yes.
Oh, we will.
Okay. We will for sure.
Very good.
Thanks a lot.
Bye. Thank you so much.
See you soon.